Aloha and good morning. I would like to call the Planning and the Economy Committee meeting to order. I would like to welcome the following members who are present in the council chambers: Committee Vice Chair Cordero and Council Members Okimoto, Se'e, and Wire. Pursuant to Hawaii Revised Statute Section 92-3.7, this meeting will be conducted as a remote meeting by interactive conference technology with the following procedures in effect for the meeting. Members of the public will be allowed to provide oral testimony remotely or in person in the council chamber on all items on the agenda when each item is taken up. All persons who register to testify in person will be called upon first, followed by those who register to testify remotely. Persons who have not registered will be given an opportunity to testify following the registered testifiers. Before testifying, each person shall state their full name and will be limited to a 1-minute presentation on each item. HRS Section 92-3.7 requires all votes at a remote meeting to be conducted by roll call unless unanimous. I will first call for objections, and if there are any, I will call for a roll call vote. For those council members participating from outside of the council chamber, under HRS Section 92-3.7, the meeting will automatically recess if we lose audiovisual contact with you and cannot reconvene until we reestablish contact. Therefore, please announce beforehand if you'll be voluntarily signing out of the meeting. Written testimonies, including the testifier's address, email address, and phone number, will be available to the public as described on the posted agenda. As a courtesy, please turn off all cell phones. Members, as many of you know, last week I was in Washington, D.C., and I was able to meet with several federal agencies and officials, including at the White House, on how the state and county officials are receiving and implementing funds received from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act. The issue of broadband came up with the Federal Communications Commission, as well as the National Telecommunications and Information Agency. So therefore, I'm very pleased that we have 2 agenda items today to talk about outreach that the federal government, as well as the state and county, may be undertaking with regard to broadband outreach in our communities. Moving on to agenda item number 1. Update on the Federal Communications Commission's Affordable Connectivity Program. For your information, the presentation is available online as Miscellaneous Communications 343. We have with us today Hawaii-grown Lyle S. Ishida, Chief Consumer Affairs and Outreach Division from the Federal Communications Commission. Mahalo nui, Mr. Ishida, for joining us today. So glad to see our local people integrated into important federal positions.
Madam Chairwoman, elected officials, aloha kakahiaka. I just cannot tell you how joyful it makes you feel to say that after living on the mainland for the last 10 or 15 years. It's great to be home. My stomach will soon be bearing the cost of the plate lunches. Thank you very much for the invitation to talk about the Affordable Connectivity Program. What I hope to do in the next 10 or 15 minutes is just give you an update of where the program stands in Hawaii, and where the program stands in Honolulu City and County. So let's just level set of what the ACP is. The Affordable Connectivity Program is the largest internet broadband affordability program in America's history. $14.2 billion out of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, targeted for low-income households. Let me try this, right? So we're gonna really quickly go over what the benefit is, who's eligible, and how households can apply, with an eye toward passing information to honorable elected officials as they do constituent services. So this is what I will be talking about during this short presentation. So the benefit for the Affordable Connectivity Program is up to a $30 a month discount for broadband services and associated rentals, and up to $75 a month discount for your monthly uh, broadband service and equipment rentals on tribal lands. The FCC has defined tribal lands as Hawaiian homelands. So that expanded discount will apply to a lot of specific locations in Hawaii. There is also a one-time potential discount for up to $100 for either a laptop, a desktop, or a tablet if the provider has opted into that part of the program. It's a provider option, and later on I'll tell you how to get to find out if your provider is providing the option. That option is really key for multi-children households who have competing homework sort of requirements where you want to add another device. That's only one device per household, okay? So eligibility as a low-income program is if the household, and before I go further, let me define household. Household is not mom, dad, and two kids and leave it to beaver. It is a collection of individuals who live together, share money and bills. Okay, that's it. So a household, if the household income is at 200% of the poverty rate, which is malleable based on size of household, or, not and, or participation in any number of federal public assistance program, the household will qualify. So as an example, SNAP, formerly known as food stamps, Medicaid, public federal housing assistance, that's just like almost any public housing assistance. Section 8 housing, Section 202 senior housing, etc. That automatically qualifies the entire household. Some national school lunch programs. And so in a lot of jurisdictions that the FCC visits, there are CEP, Community Eligibility Provision Schools, which I believe include a lot of Hawaii. So in those schools, a kid gets free or reduced school lunch or breakfast programs without means testing. So what that means is that child can make the entire household eligible without a means test, and that really expands the reach of the program because we know just people just beyond other means sort of testings are still needing discounts. So school lunch programs and such, anyone who's received a Pell Grant, Veterans Pension and Survivors Benefit, which is a really specific program, and also for people who have met a participating provider's low-income program, they can slide into the ACP within that provider program. So there are lots of ways to qualify for the Affordable Connectivity Program. So before I go on to consumer protections written into the statute, I want to just spend a little more time on affordability. So about a year ago, President Biden called a number of providers, large, small, medium, to say how can we work together with the ACP to boost affordability for those households who could use it more. And so there was a sort of informal agreement that a lot of providers would price high quality, high speed internet programs at $30, which is what the benefit is. In other words, there are zero out-of-cost dollars as long as you qualify for ACP. And at the end of this, I'm going to tell you how consumers can find in Hawaii, because I did zip code searches on University of Hawaii, my high school, right? Mid-Pac 96822, 96786 Mililani, and also in Waianae, West Coast, and there are proactively providers here in Honolulu City County who will provide consumers with a zero cost, out-of-pocket broadband service. This is not the crappy, slow service too. This is really good service, and also participate in the $100 discount. So I'll tell you how to get to there as well. The statute also provided really key consumer protections for low-income households. We know that low-income households sometimes suffer from sort of credit challenges, etc. So among the different consumer protections are the consumer applicant who is accepted in the ACP cannot be denied service because of their credit score by the participating provider. They cannot be held back if they have their account in arrears with their existing provider. And the consumer can, after 30 days, switch providers and plans without penalty. And so, my poor dad, I'm going to talk about my dad here. If you're my dad and you really like this salesman who sold him this really big, expensive broadband plan, and I'm like, dude, man, I'm Chief of Consumer Information and Affairs at FCC. You should talk to me, Dad. If you're my dad and you qualify, you can get off of that plan without penalty, and you can shop around without penalty. And so the ACP flips the power script of consumers to be able to do that, so that not having their credit hold them back from a internet plan, or not having bills in arrears hold them back from their plan. They can continue to shop around. They are not locked in to this 2-year plan just because, Dad really liked that salesman. He was a nice guy, right? So those sorts of tools for consumers, we think will help, one, adoption, and will help consumers' pocketbooks as well, be giving all of the power back to the consumer family as well. So the FCC also has developed a dedicated process for adjudicating complaints if you're in the ACP. And so I know I've met a number of folks who are like me, have worked in DC and have come back, and God bless y'all. So just a shortcut, right? The consumer complaints go directly to the carrier, and they have a 30-day shot clock to respond the way that the FCC handles congressionals. And so we've put the needs and the complaints of consumers in ACP sort of at the highest level in case there are any issues with the provider. So for those members, elected members of council, I'm going to stop here with the exception of this. The next sections are how the FCC can help you with consumer and constituent outreach. We have a print plant. We have a number of copy and pastable newsletter inserts, social media pictures, etc., that can help you advance the information of ACP throughout your communities. And that's because, I think let's talk about Honolulu real quickly. So in terms of enrollment, right, as of April, Honolulu City, the City and County Area of Operations Island has 25,426 enrolled households. That's part of Hawaii's, I'm going to have to do apples and oranges because the counties are reported a little differently than states. Hawaii's state, as of last week, was 45,944. But the thing I want us to pay attention to is the percentage of eligible households versus eligible households who've applied. And unfortunately, we can only do it by state because Honolulu City County is the majority of the state. I think we can assume much of the percentages are about the same. The percentages are Hawaii, the state, has enrolled 24% of its eligible households, and that is compared in contrast to the national blended figure of 34%. And there are probably a number of reasons that we all deal with, working with constituencies with language, multicultural, multi-language issues that are here. And so our job is to support you, which is why that second part of how we can help you applies. And the chairwoman has my card. I'm going to leave a bunch of my cards here. I am really just an email away. And even if you're not sure what we can do to help you, just an ask, and we're going to do as much as we can to help you. Separately, this is public knowledge. We have just recently announced outreach grants across the 50 states and territories. And within Hawaii, the FCC has issued just over $1 million of consumer outreach grants, $740,000 to the State Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism, and $350,000 to El Paio. I'm saying that wrong. It's Waianae Coast Comprehensive Health Center entity, and they're $350,000 in a location like that. To me, it feels really, really well placed and such. So I just wanted to kind of announce that. And being mindful of your busy schedule and time, I think that concludes my outbound presentation. I'm happy to take questions. And again, want to thank Chairwoman for the opportunity to come and talk to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ishida. And one of my questions had to do with who was implementing it. So it would be DBDT and Ella Paio Social Services on the Waianae Coast. Is that correct?
That grant, yes, they had provided a plan, implementation plan for grant reviewers to look at.
And who at the Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism is implementing this for the state?
I believe our contact, so my contact as the outreach chief is Bert Lum, who serves as
Bert Lum.
Yeah, who serves as the broadband director.
So before I open to questions, so you say about outreach, so do we work directly with these individuals, or do we work directly with you if we want to do outreach activities in our districts?
I would, as a personal matter, I'm all of the above kind of guy, right? I'm happy to take any requests and such. I also am mindful that outreach is not just talking to people. It is best done locally. And so some guy from Washington, D.C., I'm going to help you, but the more local the efforts are, the more effective they are, because consumers listen and trust those people who live with them, work with them, play with them, worship with them. And so I think our best position at the FCC is to help local leaders, local community members who are in your circle. And by all means, I would welcome for those folks who are in your area, if you have, the JCs who live in your area and they want to do something, send them to me and we'll train them, but we won't do a lot of consistent work.
And Mr. Ishida, you are from Hawaii.
Yep.
So our communities would welcome you if we can make it easier for you by doing webinars. We will reach out to Mr. Lum. He actually left a voicemail for me. He was unable to be here today, but we'll do that. But just pleased for you to be here. Members, I'm going to open it to questions. Councilmember, Vice Chair Cordero.
Thank you, Councilmember Chair Kiaina, actually for having this. I think it's such a valuable conversation that we had. And Mr. Ishida, thank you so much for being here. My one question is relating to the ACP and if it is citizen restrictive, because I do have a lot of people who are part of, who may qualify for certain programs, but a lot of my constituents may not be actual citizens?
That's a really good question, one that comes up a lot, Councilman. It is not, but you have to jump two hurdles. You have to have you have some way to means test and a way to prove your identity. So traveling around the country for states that issue driver's licenses to non-citizens, that becomes something that is useful, but finding a way to prove identity is going to be the hurdle for folks who are not citizens.
Thank you. And so those who will have to prove that, does it go through a particular program manager that they're applying with, or should they be going to any of these program eligible places like SNAP, WIC, or any other state agency?
So applications actually can be done online by anyone. However, as Chairwoman Kia Aina and I had talked about, probably best done in a guided environment. And so my team will get on a Zoom and we will train your trainer. We will train librarians or whoever, because these sort of things pop up, and we don't want to have sort of a knowledge gap to block consumers from being accepted to the program.
Thank you. And my next question is, we have a Kalihi Connection Coalition. So I represent from the communities of Kapalamakai to Waimalukai. And so I would love to, if possible, have you at one of our Kalihi Connection Coalition meetings where it's a hui of nonprofit organizations that focus in our Kalihi Kapalama area.
I would love, this is the reason I have a job. I would love to do
Awesome.
that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And lastly, I know you mentioned mid-pack. I want to say that you have two mid-pack grads right here. Councilmember Wire and myself.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
That's all. I'll stop talking. All right.
Members, any other questions?
Yeah.
Councilmember Wire.
Thank you, Chair. And mahalo, Chief, for being here. I just wanted to ask, so given that this came out through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, do we anticipate this being a long-term program, or are there other future policies we're going
That's
to
a
implement?
really great question. So we're funded $14.2 billion. Right now, unless there's additional congressional action, the program goes away at the end of funding, not
Okay.
at a specific date.
Okay. Oh, that's really helpful. And I just ask because I know there's a whole lot of efforts to get broader access. So maybe by the time it runs out, we can have all those issues resolved. We'll see what Director Hasselby has to say on that. Do we have anybody at the city you've worked with as a point of contact to potentially be a trainer? Or is that kind of outside the scope of?
There is no prohibition for someone from the city to work as a primary trainer. I just have not made the connection. It's probably my fault.
Okay.
But I've made the connection with the state. So I would ask that you pass my contact around, find a number of people, and we will train them up.
Okay. No, appreciate it. I don't want to create more work for anybody, but I was just curious.
Work is my job.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
is my job. Good.
Okay. Mahalo. Mahalo, Chair.
That's a good point. I know that Amy Dem are doing a good job in outreaching and letting people know about the program, but maybe their Pacific Island liaison would be a good person to train to help in doing outreach programs. Any other questions? Councilmember Say, Councilmember Okimoto? Mr. Ishida, thank you so much again for coming. God bless you and your family, and I hope you spend quality time with them while you're here.
Thank you very much for the opportunity on behalf of everyone from the FCC.
We will now proceed with in-person testimony. Clerks, do we have any in-person testifiers?
Chair, there are none.
Is there anyone else in the council chamber who would like to testify? Please come forward to the testifier podium and state your name for the record. Hearing none, we will now proceed with remote testimony. Clerks, do we have any remote testifiers?
Chair, we have one remote testifier, Angela Young.
Good morning. Angela, how are you?
I'm okay. Okay, Chair. Angela Melody Young, testifying in strong support. And so I'd just like to say thanks for the presentation. And so at the state, HB 1408 identifies and addresses obstacles to digital equity in the state by creating the Digital Equity Grant Program and to create an environment in which all individuals and communities in the state have the information technology capacity for full participation in society, so that in whatever it is that they do, they can continue to contribute positively to democracy and the economy and whatever it is that they do. Many sectors in our world requires wireless connection and internet. There's a lot of legislation about integrating data in the medical sector, HPD, which further highlights this point that if we support digital equity initiatives, it can then honor the work of our first responders, for example. HB 963 was a measure to build the infrastructure for the fiber optics for the digital equity, but neither of these measures
Angela?
passed.
Angela, could you please wrap up, please?
Okay, I will wrap up. And then also, in closing, the LG's office works on Wi-Fi and digital equity. And so since none of their legislations passed, it may be a good idea to contact them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And of course, you heard what Mr. Ishida said. You know, if you have any community organizations that would like training or outreach, please work with your council member, and maybe you can work with Mr. Ishida directly. Thank you so much. Is there anyone standing by remotely? Please use that raise hand feature in Zoom. Clerks, is there anyone else standing by remotely?
Chair, there are none.
Members, we are in discussion. Hearing none, we are going to move on to agenda item number 2, an update on the city's outreach plan to get input on the state's Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Award and the state's Digital Equity Planning Grant Awards under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. Members, for your information, the presentation is available online as Mayor's Message 120. For the administration, we have Amy Asobai, Executive Director of the Office of Economic Revitalization. I understand that we have on standby some members from the University of Hawaii who will be available for questions. Director Asobai.
Thank you, Chair and Council members, for coming today to the info briefing. We appreciate the opportunity to start talking about the city's new engagement on broadband generally. Two folks from the Office of Economic Revitalization are joining me today. Online is Constancio Perinal. He is the Office of Economic Revitalization's Innovation and Technology Manager. Additionally, Lenore Hahn, our new data strategist. She's been with us for, coming close to 6 months now, maybe 4 months. And also our new intern working with the data team, Nikki Sena. So we welcome them, and there may be questions that they can address also as we go along. Constancio will be presenting the presentation for the Office of Economic Revitalization, but I wanted to preface this by saying all counties are engaged with the University of Hawaii as the lead for the Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment Act. However, it is one program among many federal bills, as well as various funding streams under those bills that will help the state of Hawaii to expand high-speed internet access across the state. This is a very complicated subject, but we wanted to start as simple and basic as possible so you could understand the role that the city has in this funding and in making sure that all of your constituents, all of our neighbors have that high-speed access that we all know everyone deserves and needs for our economic diversification goals, so we have opportunities outside of the tourism industry to expand and explore not just work, but our healthcare from home, right? Our education from home. You may order your groceries from home, but you need the internet to do that. And not only do you need the internet, you need to understand how to do that. And I'm happy to say we have learned a lot by having the opportunity to work on the rental and utility relief program. And just kind of to prelude some things that Constancio could respond to when we go is, to be clear, we want to talk about the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. The Affordable Connectivity Program is a separate program that the FCC is running, and the dollars currently go to the state broadband office at DBET. So they are managing, with the support of the broadband HUI, the outreach into our communities. They have a team of folks at DBET, not in the Lieutenant Governor's office, that run this program. And we work closely with them. We meet with them weekly. And I'm happy to say that they have participated and are planning to participate in the outreach events that we are doing on the rental relief program. The Affordable Connectivity Program has been around for a while. And so when folks come to our rental relief program and ask for utility help, which can include the internet or just trying to cover your service fee, we generally refer people to the Affordable Connectivity Program so we can focus the dollars that we have for rental relief and utility relief on gas, electric, and rent, right? And so we've always tried to work with them. Constancio has done a number of outreach events with them at the Susanna Wesley Center and other community-based organizations around the island. But we want to build that up. We look forward to continuing to work with them. The funding does sit with the state, and Constancio can touch on that a little bit more, but I just kind of wanted to try to cover some of those questions that you have. And now to turn it over to Constancio, I'll click through the presentation and he'll start to talk to you a little bit about our role in the city on the outreach and the work that we'll be doing on the broadband equity access and deployment legislation.
Thank you very much, Amy, and mahalo to Chair Kiana, Vice Chair Cordero, and the council members who are present today. And as Amy mentioned, this work is not only happening in Hawaii, it's a complex project, but across the United States and its territories. This work is part of the Biden's administration's Internet for All initiative, which aims to bring high-speed internet to everyone in America. Internet for All, in general, wants to make sure that every home in the United States has access to high-speed internet to work, learn, and play. And one of the major programs, as Amy alluded to, that we would like to speak to today is the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program through the NTIA, or the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, which dedicates about $42 billion to construct broadband networks across the United States. As Amy mentioned as well, there are additional funding streams through the IIJA, or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which include digital equity competitive grants, affordable connectivity program funds, rural digital opportunity funds, and tribal broadband connectivity funds. I would like to start by defining the term broadband because it's a very technical word. It is a shorthand for being always on, for high-speed internet connection, which is provided by companies or other entities known as an internet service provider, or ISP, such as AT&T, Spectrum, Charter. The internet, as we all know, has taught us that access to an affordable, high-speed home internet connection is no longer a luxury, but a necessity. And for Hawaii citizens living in rural communities who might be separated from major cities, broadband can mean leveling the economic and academic playing fields. It is needed for our keiki to learn to their fullest potential, for families to use telehealth, to see doctors online, as Amy mentioned, and also for entrepreneurs to start their businesses and create good jobs for our people. So again, there are numerous federal programs, federal acts that represent the overall funding potential for the state. And the University of Hawaii is the lead developer for the plans, including both formula and competitive programs. The city and county of Honolulu, however, does not receive these funds directly, but we are a sub-recipient of the BEAD program and possibly the digital equity funding, which is, as Amy mentioned, what we are here to talk about today. So today, the focus really is on those two areas where the city and county of Honolulu is working with the state to develop the plan specific to the island of Oahu. First, the NTIA funding for the BEAD grant, which I mentioned, dedicates about $42 billion to construct broadband networks across the United States. And in Hawaii, that effort again is led by the University of Hawaii for the overall state plan. The Digital Equity and Affordable Connectivity Program, the Digital Equity, for instance, dedicates about $2.75 billion federally to educate and connect community to internet learning and services. The ACP, which we discussed a while ago, allots about $14.2 billion federally to states to subsidize internet service plans for low-income families. In Hawaii, this effort is led, as Mr. Ishida mentioned a while ago, by DBED's Broadband Office for the overall state plan. So as far as the Office of Economic Revitalization, we are taking the lead in supporting the University of Hawaii and the state's Broadband Equity Office in the design, development, and the delivery of the 5-year BEAD plan. And OER is managing community engagement at the county level. As part of this, we are helping to organize the Oahu Digital Equity Coalition, which we would like to share with you in a few minutes. Now, it is also important to understand kind of like what the lay of the land looks like as far as current broadband coverage. So the Federal Communications Commission released a map of the United States that shows broadband coverage. The highly contested map identifies essentially areas that are currently unserved and underserved. And if we take a closer look at the island of Oahu and specifically narrowing it down to wired systems, looking at cable and fiber, it actually shows that we are about 95.7% covered. And the University of Hawaii team did an analysis and they estimated that there are about 247 unserved and also 0 underserved households in the island of Oahu. So one of the city's roles really is to validate the number of unserved and underserved households and locations. And we'll talk more about what unserved and underserved means. In technical terms, unserved means locations with access to a 25 megabit per second download speed and 3 megabit per second upload speed. On the other hand, underserved locations refer to having access to 100 megabit per second download speed and 20 megabit per second service. So the baseline is the 25/3 in order to meet that broadband high-speed internet service. So to ensure that we have an accurate map, the strategy that we have employed is 3-pronged. First, we want to make sure that we are sharing information through regular meetings and discussions with our partners, specifically the University of Hawaii and the State of Hawaii's Department of Business, Economic Development, and Tourism, and our fellow counties to support the BEAD initiative, as well as the digital equity planning and delivery. Second is the establishment of the Oahu Digital Equity Coalition, or what we refer to as ODEC, which is a coalition of community leaders to gain community insight as well as engagement. And lastly, we have developed this new tool that we will use for data aggregation and communication, which is what we call the Broadband Story Map, which we can share with you in a few minutes. As I mentioned, given that this is a statewide effort, it is important to highlight the entities that are leading the effort. So for the University of Hawaii of Manoa, they are responsible for BEAD, and they are currently working on the BEAD 5-year plan, which is due by the end of July 30th, or next month. TBET Digital Equity Office is responsible for the digital equity plan. And as Amy mentioned, the counties are working together to make sure that we are in alignment and we are sharing best practices, particularly with community engagement. I would like to highlight here as well that we do have a current, we're working towards a memorandum of agreement with the University of Hawaii, which will provide us with 100,000 to start with in order to kick off our outreach activities. So on June 5th, inspired by the work that Hawaii County has done to support BEAD activities, OER convened our first Oahu Digital Equity Coalition meeting. And as mentioned earlier, it brings together community leaders on Oahu who are committed and are supportive of ensuring that every resident has access to high-speed internet. Our next meeting will be on July 3rd at 10 a.m. and we invite the council members and your staff to be a part of this conversation because in our last meeting, it was actually brought to us by the members of ODEC that it would be great to have you present because you are the frontline advocates of your communities. So we welcome you to be a part of ODEC. And lastly, as far as the tool that we are using, we want to make sure that our neighbors on Oahu have access to broadband and that the map accurately represents those that are currently underserved and unserved. And to achieve this, we identified 3 priority areas that align with the priority areas of the federal government's National Telecommunications and Information Administration. And we would like to use the broadband story map in order to gather that data and that information that would be useful as we continue to pursue this effort. So guided by the strategy, we identified those 3 priorities and tactical approaches to the delivery of this program. The next slide would show that the county's first priority is to help that the county's first priority is to help identify community leaders who can tell what the communities need and who to reach out to as well. And that is kind of like the main goal and the main priority of the ODEC. The second priority is to ensure that we're able to identify the community anchor institution and identify locations on the island that are currently unserved or underserved, and requesting the community leaders for help in getting their feedback from the community is going to be the key priority for this approach. And then, of course, the last part is hosting outreach events, wherein we want to gather community members at events, brief them on BEAD programs, and make sure that we get that feedback and hopefully have the requisite information in order to challenge that data. So our ask is to the council members is to support one of these 2 options. First is to help the Office of Economic Revitalization and ODEC to identify community associations and leaders in your districts whom we may reach out to for community engagement activities. And second is to share the information with your constituents through your community outreach events. We know that you and your teams are very busy, so we ask only that you consider supporting one of these options. So mahalo for your time, and we're happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Before we go on to questions, and I'm going to lead off with a couple of questions, just for the purposes of today's hearing so people could differentiate between what we heard from the FCC and the funding received through this program. Could you explain the difference on the different funding streams? So did you hear the first agenda item from the FCC with regard to the Affordable Connectivity Program? Explain the difference to people who are listening, what the difference is be both touch broadband initiatives. Explain what the difference is between what the Affordable Connectivity Program does versus the BEAD program.
Thank you for that question, Chair Kiana. I think that question would be mostly appropriate for the University of Hawaii because they are handling most of the federal programs that are available to the state. The programs that the city and county of Honolulu has roles to support is the BEAD program and also possibly the digital equity. So I'm not sure, Susan, if you're able to address that.
And then Susan, can you identify yourself for the record before you answer that question? And then I have a series of questions for you as well.
Hi, good morning. Susan Hirai. I'm the Broadband Grant Program Coordinator here at the University of Hawaii. Thank you for letting me be part of your meeting this morning. Let's see, I understand that there's a lot of programs and it does get complicated. So for my understanding, the ACP is a FCC program and it's run by DBED as mentioned, whereas BEAD is funded by the NTIA, and we're focused more on infrastructure build, but also recognizing the other pieces that flow into broadband, but primarily the infrastructure side, whereas the ACP is program and getting people services, I guess, so the wraparound services that they need.
Thank you so much. And thank you for being here. Can you explain the university's role with regard to the state's Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Fund program?
So right now we're overall doing the overall coordination, I guess, for that program. As this is one of the largest federal funded programs that is coming into the state, a minimum of $100 million. We're anticipating to hopefully know what the exact dollar amount is on we're crossing our fingers. Monday, they are supposed to have a press conference, the White House. So right now we're working towards our BEAD 5-year action plan, which as Constancio mentioned is due at the end of July. And that is kind of just overseeing and an overview of how we plan to go forward in the infrastructure build primarily. And then of course, as mentioned, incorporating those wraparound services and the digital equity, which is tied into the BEAD program, because we understand not just installing the wiring is what the communities, they also need to know how to use it and how to access it and the other programs to get them to be able to be connected.
Okay, thank you. With regard to the eligibility of use, can we get clarity on the uses? What can the $100 million the state has already received be used for? Number one. Number two, what can the additional funds that the state may receive be used for? And number three, it's a three-part question for eligibility of use. And can we get some concrete examples? Is this for laying cables? Tell me a little bit more about the parameters for the infrastructure.
It is the primary, primarily, I'm sorry, there's two pots of funding. I just want to make sure I'm answering the correct question. So the funding that we're hoping to give to the counties to help with the outreach is part of the $5 million we've received for planning. The $100 million are part of that we hope to be getting minimally that will be announced on hopefully Monday is for the infrastructure build. So the cabling and that's the primary priority. However, if there are additional funds left over after the infrastructure build, that can be used towards digital equity or workforce development, those other kind of wraparound service programs. I can try to provide a better written response maybe to you if that.
Sure.
If that would be helpful.
And I understand the $100 million, but you may be eligible for additional funds. So if you could provide that in your response, I'd appreciate it. And educate us on concrete examples of what the funds could be used for.
Definitely, I will do that.
And actually, let me go to other members first before I continue my questioning. Vice Chair Cordero.
Thank you, Chair Kia Aina. My question is actually, I'm not sure who will be directed to, but I did and I still have a lot of HPHA properties that are in my district, and we realize that I know some of the infrastructure that HPHA has sometimes isn't conducive to, I guess I won't say laying out, but like connecting the different internet connectivities. So I was wondering how that has been addressed in the last few years. Is that for UH or whoever?
I think I can try to answer that. So there is another grant. It's a CPF grant that is specifically for HPHA and their infrastructure build. I believe that the RFP is being developed right now and will be posted for bid hopefully soon. I know that Garrett's been working on it. And if there's more details you want on that, I can definitely follow up with him on that. But there is another grant, CPF grant, that's designated for connectivity in Hawaii public housing. Yes.
Thank you. And I guess I was referring to the draft BEAD plan that was linked on the presentation, and reading about how HPHA is a partner for pretty much a lot of the priorities here, and relating to infrastructure also relates to how much the connectivity can, I guess, transcend through the actual physical buildings and infrastructure. And I know that was an issue before, which is why I brought that up. So thank you. That would be good to know. Thank you.
Councilmember Wire.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to walk through a little bit more on the unserved, underserved households. So when we look at, and I guess this may be for Constancio, but anyone feel free to jump in. So I'm looking at page 7 in comparison to page 11. And so I just wanted to double check. So when we're looking at page 11, that's the same 247 plus 0 households, or was there a number breakdown on the, I guess that would be the state's map or UH's map? Yeah.
I'll have Lenore Hahn, who's been working on all the data in our office, to explain that further to you.
Awesome, mahalo.
Hi, thank you. The map that you see here is the FCC map.
Yeah.
So this is populated by internet service provider data, as well as other layers of data that they use to create what all of the funding streams are allocated for, right? So if you flip forward to the second map that you're looking at with the orange dots, that's UH's map. So UH is required by the NTIA to take the FCC map and then drill down on those locations that the FCC provides to determine which are underserved and unserved. Okay. So we started with 471 locations, and they drilled down to that 200 and, what was the number? 240, I think, is what we're at now.
Okay.
So they're required by the NTIA to do that in a very, the methodology is required by the NTIA. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. So the map on page 11 created by the state is a more accurate reflection of the distribution or lack of service, I guess we'll say, on Oahu.
Right, so they start with the NTIA map. They have a methodology that they have to use in order to validate or verify those locations.
Okay. And so when we're talking about, and then may still be you, or I'll defer to whoever wants to answer. So coming back to what we're talking about in terms of the differences between the programs, and this is specifically households that don't have the ability to connect cable or fiber directly to their home, or is that correct?
Correct, because what those identified locations are unserved, which means they don't have fiber connection from wherever that fiber connection ends on the road. They don't have it to their home.
Okay.
That's unserved. If it was underserved locations that were identified, that would be different.
Okay, I see. And actually, so unserved would be 247. So it doesn't necessarily mean, or do we know out of those households how many have actual access to some type of internet? I mean,
so if they are considered unserved, they have no access. They have
Okay.
no fiber connection and no other point of access. That's the way I understand unserved.
okay, so like a cell phone, they wouldn't be able to get on because there's no signal, or we don't know.
The way that I understand it, if they are considered unserved by UH and NTIA, or sorry, by the FCC,
Yeah.
they have no connection points.
Okay, I appreciate that, which makes sense because I'm just thinking when I drive around Kamehameha Highway, you like lose cell phone service, right? So, okay, mahalo for that. Do we have an anticipated timeline, Director, for when this will, and it could be any one when this will be fixed? Or in terms of when everyone will have the ability to access broadband?
Oh, when it will be fixed is a whole other story.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm thinking it's probably oversimplification, but I'm like 247, like couldn't we just put some more towers out there? I don't know, but.
So
yeah.
The plan has to be a statewide plan.
Okay.
It's one thing to say, let's look at the North Shore or where these orange areas are and just serve them. But the state through UH is trying to address the totality. So it's one thing to have a line that comes to the road or into your house. It's a whole other thing to develop the plan in terms of where does the undersea cable come from? That needs to be reinforced. You may have heard recently that Hawaiian Telcom received a $37 million grant from the feds for their cabling around the islands to improve the reliability of that network. So there's many aspects to the plan, and frankly, I would say from UH's perspective, Oahu is kind of looking better than most of the neighbor islands.
Okay.
I think we all heard during the pandemic of students, families, individuals that had no access to education or healthcare because at the time it had to be accessed online. And so thinking of, the distance, some of our geography, the fact that our, those circling cables are some are in the water, some are on shoreside, they have a big challenge and plan with all of that. So yes, it will get to our residences, but this plan, geez, Susan, is it 20? It's a 5-year plan, which is only being submitted by July 30th. So I'll let Susan jump in there.
Yes, just like Amy said, it is a 5-year plan. So it is, we understand, a little bit down the pipe wire in terms of getting the install and construction actually going. The 5-year plan is due at the end of July, but the initial proposal, which is the detailing out of those specific locations based on the exact amount of funding we're proposed to receive, is not due until the end of December. And so probably build won't be until 2024, I would guess. So just keeping that in mind as well as we discuss further or go forward on this.
Mahalo, appreciate that. Almost done. And because I know I think we previously talked about, possibly along the rail line, certain parks or areas that would have Wi-Fi. Is that your understanding of kind of the plan, the initial plan the city is working on, or?
So I'll let Susan address that again, because as the overarching entity, whether it's the State Department of Transportation and their fiber plans, which I think some of us have heard are extensive across the state, or the city's plans in relation to rail, they all roll up into the overall plan.
Okay.
I apologize. I don't know specifically on the transit portion. I know for the BEAD portion, it is for wired the cabling, not just cell phone towers and all that. I'm not sure if it might be able to fall under a community anchor institution kind of a thing. I can definitely follow up with Garrett on that, but we are working with the other state departments as well, trying to figure out all the different projects and what's being built and where the responsibilities are and all of that good stuff as well. So,
okay, no, I appreciate that.
Because there's all this other funding that is also available, right? The Department of Transportation, the Department of Transportation Services, they have other funding through the Infrastructure Act, potentially through the Consolidated Appropriations Act, whether it be, for rural access, rail access, tribal access. There's a lot of other funding out there too.
Okay, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, I only ask because I'd imagine like the Ocean Safety Parks folks at Ali'i Beach Park, the park staff at Kahuku District Park, like Koloa, Kahalu'u, probably have access to broadband, right, or computer access. And so that's why I'm just wondering if we did like free Wi-Fi, in particular areas where the community could come. But I don't know if that's oversimplification.
What you're talking about in terms of the BEAD plan would be a part of our community outreach and trying to determine those buildings or those organizations that might be best suited. That's the community anchor institution part of this, to not only, let's say, have a high-speed internet connection, but also have the digital equity programs, right? So it's one thing for the fiber to come to your doorstep. It's another thing for, do you have the funds to pay for your internet service, right? That's a challenge for some families. It's another thing if you have kupuna or someone who's disabled, or you have 15 people that live in the house and ultimately you need super high-speed internet for more than one person to be online at a time. So there are all sorts of challenges that we hope to detail and learn about through our community outreach. So not only can we contribute to or validate the served, unserved, and underserved, which we need your help to do, but also then to identify organizations and leaders in your institutions or in your communities that can help us to not only gather your community members to understand what their individual challenges are, right? So we can fund the right type of programs to help them out, but also then those anchor institutions that might be a good place wherever it is, right? Eva, Hau'ula, Kalihi, who are those organizations that can help us in terms of true digital equity?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Because I imagine it'd be expensive to have
can
free Wi-Fi at every park, every city park. Yeah, okay.
Yes, we also heard during our town halls that some communities don't want that because it attracts people to the parks at the wrong time of the day. So maybe free internet during the day, but then it shuts off after park hours.
Yeah.
So there's lots of detail that we need to work through. And again, we, in the city role, would really appreciate the ability to work with you to really define what's needed. Why is it different in Hau'ula to Eva to Mo'iliili, et cetera?
Okay. Mahalo, appreciate that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Okimoto?
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to go back to Councilmember Wire had asked questions about the maps. I still had a couple of questions, if that's okay, because you mentioned the unserved, and that's no access, no connection points. But then we also have underserved on here, and the maps kind of put them together. And on page 7, it says that the city's role is to validate the number that the FCC did. So if you could clarify, I know earlier Constancio had kind of said some numbers about 100 megabits, 25 megabits, but I don't understand, when I'm looking at this blue map, how it correlates to this, and are we separating underserved and unserved? What's the difference between the two? Because the dots are just the same color right now.
That's a good question. So again, that blue map is the FCC map that's provided by the internet service providers, and that's what UH used to create that second map that you see where the dots are more
So
defined.
on this one with the FCC, I know you said the FCC did it. So what are the blue, the dark blue, the light blue, and the white on here?
So if they are dark blue, they're considered served, and the lighter the color, the more dots in that area that are considered unserved or underserved.
And then you use those terms together, but it sounds like they're two different things. What's the difference?
Technically, they're separate, yeah. So the unserved population are those that do not have fiber line to their home. That's the way you can think about that.
The unserved. And
Unserved.
so what's the criteria to be considered underserved then?
Underserved is the 120. So 100 upload speed, 100 megabytes per second upload speed, and 20 download speed. That's considered unserved. Or sorry, underserved. I'm kind of confused you more. So sorry. Constancia, jump in if you wanted to.
Yeah, it has some, just like what I think that's a very simplified way to define the unserved and underserved. And it really talks about when you define the underserved and unserved, it has something to do with the connection and the speed. Because like what we mentioned, when you talk about underserved, the download speed is 100 and the upload is 20, right? So you think about, how many people are accessing the internet at a specific given amount of time. So a household in the US, you could expect about 5 different gadgets and different connections, right? And when we talk about the upload and the download, that is essentially using Skype. So Skype, for instance, would use about 1.5 upload speed, but that's only one instance of using Skype or video conferencing. Imagine 3 people in a household using it at the same time. So we're talking about at the peak of that of a household using devices, using the internet, do they have access to that type of speed? So basically, that's the difference between unserved and underserved.
And then the map only has orange dots on them for both. So how do we decipher between where it's unserved, where there's no access or connection, versus the underserved, according to the map?
It's another good question. So I know that this map is difficult to see. When you do visit the story map, you can actually zoom in. Unfortunately, the data that's provided from the FCC to UH is proprietary information, so they can't release individual addresses, so you wouldn't be able to see that. You will be able to tell, though, that every single dot on there is considered unserved, because what UH provided us was that there are 0 locations on the island that are considered underserved.
So there are 0 locations considered underserved.
Correct.
That have this 100 megabytes connection and 20 download speed. So these are all unserved. So why do you, but just because you have to, because of the SEC map, you have to label it underserved and unserved? Is that the reason?
So in the BEAD NOFO, it requires the funding to be spent first on the unserved population. Whatever's left over, they can use to service the underserved. Whatever's left over, they can use to service community anchor institutions. Whatever's left over, they can use for digital equity. So you can think of it like a funnel.
Okay, and again, there are 0 underserved areas on Oahu?
That is currently what UH has found, given the methodology that they were required to use by the NTIA.
Okay, thank you.
And if I could add, council member, I think the idea with the community engagement is to make sure that, we're validating that number, right? Because like what you mentioned, 0 underserved, is that correct? So what we really wanted to do with the community outreach is to reach out to community anchor institution and really ask the communities, are there underserved areas in these communities? And go back to UH and basically say, this is what the community has said, and so we want to further incorporate that into the plan. So the great idea with the good idea with the plan is that it is community driven. So the community is the one who's going to tell UH in terms of how what activities needs to be done and how the money needs to be spent. So that's why community outreach is a requirement for the plan.
Okay, thank you. I had a follow-up question based on what you just said, Constancio. So with this funnel of funding that you mentioned, when we do the unserved first, how much of it are we estimating to be left to then go to the underserved and then the community? Because if you're saying 0, which I think my radar went off to, that doesn't sound accurate, but how much are we looking at that would be left realistically if we're first focusing on the unserved?
Right. So I'll let Susan respond on if there's any inkling on how the funding at this point would be determined, right? $100 million for infrastructure is a formula amount. They could get more based on what we learn from this digital equity this community outreach. So I'm not questioning anyone's integrity or anything, but this is just the initial map for the first time in the history of the United States that we've received to the FCC this proprietary information from internet service providers, put it on a map and said, does this look like what internet service truly is in your community, at your house, at the park near you, on the road near you, whatever? So we feel that it may not be an accurate reflection. And as an example of that, I believe there's about 4 million challenges to the map across the country. Just as an example, right? But this is where we get to start from. And so from here, there's various things that our office has engaged with UH to help them validate. So they've asked us, for example, for tax map keys to look at some of these areas and tell us, is there a residence there? Is it a park there? What is that? And so that's what Lenore and others on our team have helped them to validate. So we've gone through that list, we've looked at some of those things, and we continue to work with UH if they have questions about validating areas, properties, et cetera. Beyond that, we really do think we need the input of you all and your community members. I can say personally, had a bike accident and had no access to any Wi-Fi, no cellular, no nothing. That may have just been my provider, and thankfully someone who drove by had it and called the ambulance. But don't we all have those stories? And so those are kind of some of the things we want to look at and understand, especially if it's at a household or a residence, which is where we're trying to make sure that these connections are strong and that people understand how to use the internet. So, Susan.
Thank you, Director Asobe. Before Susan answers, so you mentioned the 100 million, and this is just the start of it. So do we, and maybe I missed it, if you could remind me, when's the deadline that we do have to use the funding before it expires that we're getting from the feds?
We actually haven't received any of that funding yet, the 100 million, because we're not even sure exactly how much we will be getting. This is the hopefully announcement to come on Monday at the White House press conference. They're hopefully going to be announcing the total that the state will be receiving for this BEAD program.
And then thank you for answering that. And then my previous question, which was this funnel of when we have the unserved and what will be left for the underserved and the community after.
Right. And we haven't determined yet how that breakdown will look. I think it will be determined on how much we actually do end up receiving from the feds. And then also on your community engagement efforts to see what the priorities of the community members are, and if the maps are in fact accurate, or if there are other locations that need to be built out to. So your help with this effort is definitely needed and much appreciated.
What benchmarks are you giving yourselves internally for the timeline to get the community input so that you can have some more accurate numbers after the possible funding was released or announced?
Yes, so our 5-year action plan is due at the end of July, which Constancio mentioned. It's on our website too right now. You could take a look at it, but that's one of the target deadlines we have to kind of get a broad picture of what we envision for the infrastructure and the BEAD program funds being spent towards. The initial proposal is due at the end of the year, so we're thinking end of December probably. We'll have more details on where specifically we will propose the builds for the broadband to be deployed to. There is also a challenge process that will occur, so counties and state agencies or even nonprofits can kind of challenge what UH has proposed or some of those locations to make sure that there is that community feedback and involvement before the build actually happens.
Thank you. Have you guys gone to any of the neighborhood boards? I'm thinking if you're looking for community input.
We have not yet, but I know that it's definitely on the top of our list of things we'd like to start doing.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I have a couple of more questions. I think this is mostly for University of Hawaii. Susan, can you explain who designated university to be the point for the implementation of the BEAD program? Was it the governor?
Yes, my understanding it was done through Governor Ige's administration.
Oh, Governor Ige's administration. Okay. So can I ask who will make the decisions on how the funds that you receive will be deployed? Who will be making the decision at the university on, again, Amy pointed out that, of course, there's formula funding, and then there's competitive funding that, of course, you can apply to as well. So at the end of the day, even out of all of this community outreach efforts and the input, who is going to be making a decision on how the funds that you receive will be deployed?
Yeah, I think it'll be through the proposal, but let me check with Garrett because he's the overall.
And who is Garrett? I'm sorry, who is Garrett?
Garrett Yoshimi, he's the VP for the CIO at University of Hawaii Systems.
CIO is Chief Information Officer?
Yes, sorry about that.
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with all of the acronyms. Okay, so he will be making that decision. Is there any, and I'm assuming, is there any criteria for how the funds will be deployed? Or are you guys working on that?
That is what we are working on, yes, to come up with a plan and how that would be dispersed and criteria and part of, for the competitive, like the RFP and all of that too, will be part of this plan that we're working on.
And how will the, who will be awarded the funds? Is it going to be other state and county entities, for example? Like, is the Office of Economic Revitalization or other city and county agencies eligible to receive funds from you for implementation of projects?
The funding, the 100 million or plus, whatever we find out we're getting, is for infrastructure build. So we are thinking it would be the internet service providers who would be doing the bids to do the build out to the houses. If that, I think, does that answer your question?
Yes, but the state's Department of Transportation and the city's Department of Transportation Services, I know, can play a tremendous role because as they lay roads, it might be in everyone's interest to do it simultaneously, yeah?
I see, yes. I will definitely make note of that and mention it to Garrett and see if maybe he has a better, thorough answer on that one.
Okay. And just to follow up with regard to Constanceo's and Amy's point, since the FCC maps that depict the under and unserved areas will likely play a key role in the federal government's determination of the distribution of the remaining funds, what has been done so far to assess the accuracy of these maps with regards to the identification of unserved and underserved areas? And basically, I'm trying to find out what can still be done to remedy any flaws, because I have a hard time believing the data that has been provided.
There are, you can still do challenges online, and we are still taking feedback, of course, on the mapping. I can definitely maybe provide to Amy or Constancio some of the websites and the information on how you can go check or contest this. And we agree that we're hoping to get more into the communities and start with the engagement so that people are aware and they can start checking and verifying and confirming what the maps are showing.
Okay, thank you. And let's switch to community outreach. Is community outreach a requirement of the BEAD program?
Yes.
And are you also required to consult with the various counties?
I would say that it is through the community engagement and outreach, and we have been working with each county to make sure we've been meeting weekly that we are getting everyone involved and the correct information out there, and hope and want to work with each county going forward, yes.
And so when we have the community input, what are you anticipating they will inform you of? Will they help with informing you of the accuracy of the maps? And are they going to determine how much money also communities might be able to receive?
My understanding is mostly in relation to the maps and the priorities, but definitely it would be taken into consideration what gets written up and gets reported on how the monies get prioritized. So there is relation to the feedback that we would be getting from the counties and their community engagement efforts.
Okay, thank you for that. And before I switch to the digital equity program for Amy, I understand you wanted to ask members if they are interested in joining the Oahu Digital Equity Coalition. Is that correct? And,
Yes.
The council members?
Yes.
Oh, okay. See, she's inviting you guys to be members of the coalition. Okay, and then also do you have any ideas or suggestions for, and then ask us for suggestions for community anchor institutions that you might be able to, equity program or two separate programs. Can you explain the difference?
Yes, the BEAD, digital equity falls under the BEAD, kind of like an umbrella. So it's a piece of the broadband connectivity effort. DBED is running the digital equity side. So they received a separate federal funded grant also through NTIA, but they are doing their own community outreach and engagement to try to touch on some of their served populations, I think, which are defined under specific categories. I apologize, I'm not as familiar with the DE program as it falls under a DBED.
I understand that there may be some overlap in the priorities and eligibility of these two programs. And so I guess I'm trying to better understand how we can all help each other and not be duplicative. Or do you know if there are any key distinctions in terms of eligibility for how the funds can be used?
I know we are working closely together with DBED and realize that, you can't, like we said, you can't have the infrastructure and not have services if people don't know how to use it and that kind of a thing. So we are working very closely with Bert. We meet with him regularly, and we both work with BNF to help get the funding distributed. I would assume there are some specific things in there, but I apologize, I don't have it offhand.
Chair Kiana, if I can add, digital equity is really aimed at improving and expanding access, but really viewing it from an affordability perspective. So it talks about digital inclusion, digital literacy. So those are kind of like the programs that the digital equity focuses on. On the other hand, BEAD is really more on the infrastructure. And another point of difference is with respect to who qualifies. So both programs, they are all for the 50 United States, including the District of Columbia and the territories. On the other hand, DE planning program is only for Indian tribes, Alaska Native entities, as well as Native Hawaiian organizations.
Thank you for that clarification. And so, Susan, you are overseeing all of the state funding, not just Oahu, correct?
Not just for the BEAD stuff.
Yes, for the BEAD. And so the 100 million is just a minimum threshold. You are eligible probably, I thought it was going to be 400 million.
We wish. No.
We'll see. I don't, okay.
I think the 400 million that was referenced on the agenda item refers to all the funding coming into the states through those different programs. So like the CPF, the DE, not just the BEAD program. So there is over 400 million in federal funds coming in, but not specifically for BEAD.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm gonna let me state that you have an important job ahead of you. And so I hope that you realize the reason we're having this meeting is so that we could become educated, and hopefully you understand what a resource you have with not just the various councils across the state, but on Oahu with all of our neighborhood boards, separate from the community outreach you're going to undertake. And I also just want to end this by saying that in the various meetings that I held in DC last week, not just on broadband, we are working in concert with the governor and all of the mayors on a federal infrastructure workshop that will likely happen in the next couple of months. The White House officials who are implementing the bipartisan infrastructure law, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act, have already been looped in, including our Hawaii congressional delegation, while the workshop will be specifically targeted for all relevant state agencies and county agencies in your case, because you guys are implementing an important program under BIL, then I think it might be of importance to you. So what we're going to do is have the various federal agencies who are helping in awarding these grants to not only come down to help educate county and state officials, especially on the competitive portion of these fundings, but also on implementation and compliance. So we'll keep you posted. But thank you so much for being here, as well as Constanzio, as well as Amy and your team. Did you have any last comments before we adjourn this hearing?
Well, I just wanted to, again, extend the invitation to participate with us in the outreach. I think all of you are here because you obviously know how to speak to the constituents in your district. And so we would appreciate your insight, your connections as a part of trying to make sure our communities have a voice in this plan, and that, you know, the intent of it, broadband equity, access, and deployment, is truly achieved in a way that, you know, your community members can say, I understand this, thank you for asking me about it, you helped resolve this problem or that problem, but we can't do it alone, UH can't do it without this input. So again, thank you for just taking the time to, you know, kind of hear us out as to where we are and help us to plan going forward. And we look forward to the opportunity to work with you on the ODAC and in any other planning that you're willing to participate in at the city and county level. Mahalo.
Thank you so much. Members, we will now proceed with in-person testimony. Clerks, do we have any in-person testifiers?
Chair, there are none.
Is there anyone else in the chamber who would like to testify? Please come forward to the testifier podium and state your name for the record. Seeing none, we will now proceed with remote testimony. Clerks, do we have any remote testifiers?
Chair, we have one remote testifier. Angela Young.
Angela, please proceed.
Aloha, Chair, Vice Chair in the committee, Angela Melody Young, testifying in support of these efforts. So as an advocacy research grassroots organization, CARES, I just reviewed all the testimonies. I just want to clarify that in the LG's written testimony for SB 829, the bill which appropriates funds for BEAD, LG says the governor has entrusted our office to oversee initiatives that will modernize our state's broadband infrastructure and ensure access to connectivity. And then in her live testimony, she talks about capability and fiber optics, building the infrastructure. And she says, we are like a sitting duck in the middle of the Pacific if we don't do something to attract broadband to land here. So they are working on separately, but on mutual goals, same as DBED. And also LG's office says that they support federal broadband grant for Department of Hawaiian Homelands, the Tribal Broadband Connectivity Program. So yeah, I just wanted to illustrate this point because it could be helpful information for integration, so that you can find out who is working on what and not repeat your work.
Angela, thank you so much for your testimony. And now you know where to find Suzanne. So thank you for the information on the Lieutenant Governor's kuleana with regard to broadband. You guys, broadband, I'm serious. This is so everyone could figure out who's doing what. So thank you so much. Clerks, is there anyone else standing by remotely?
Chair, there are none.
Okay, members, we are in discussion. If we are seeing that there's no further discussion, there being no further business, this meeting is adjourned.